I woke up that morning to the cold wind howling through the cracks of my New York apartment window, and as I reached for my cup of coffee, it slipped through my trembling fingers and shattered on the floor. The sharp crash echoed something I hadn't dared to feel for years: brokenness, loneliness, despair. Then, like a punch to the gut, I received a text from my daughter: "Mom, I threw everything you left here out. Don't contact me again." Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Margaret, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 72 years old, and I've lived in New York City for most of my life. That morning when my world came crashing down along with my coffee cup, I was wearing the same faded blue robe I'd owned for 15 years. The chenille was worn thin at the elbows, but it was soft and familiar, like an old friend who never judged me. I live in a tiny one-bedroom apartment in Queens, on the third floor of a brick building that's seen better days. The radiator clanks and hisses like an angry cat, and the walls are so thin I can hear Mrs. Chen's television through the plaster. But it's home. Or at least, it was supposed to be. Every morning, I wake before dawn. The city never truly sleeps, and neither do I, it seems. The faint hum of traffic on Queens Boulevard starts around 4:30, mixing with the distant rumble of the subway that carries millions of people to their important lives. I shuffle from my narrow galley kitchen to my small living room, my slippers making soft whispers against the hardwood floor that creaks with every step. I have a routine. I suppose all elderly people do. First, I make coffee in the old percolator that belonged to my mother. The smell fills the apartment with something warm and familiar. Then I dust off the faded family photos that line the shelves, photos of better days, of holidays filled with laughter in Central Park, crowded Thanksgiving tables where everyone actually wanted to be there, birthday parties where Emily blew out her candles and made wishes I thought would always include me. There's one photo I stop at every morning. It's Emily when she was 7 years old, her smile like the first blush of spring, her hair in pigtails I braided every morning before school. She's wearing her favorite yellow dress with tiny daisies, the one she begged me to buy even though it cost more than my grocery budget that week. In the photo, she's holding my hand as we stand outside the Museum of Natural History. I remember that day perfectly. We spent hours looking at dinosaur bones and meteorites, and she kept asking me question after question. "Mama, how old is this rock? Mama, why did the dinosaurs disappear?" I had answers for everything then. Or at least, I pretended to. Those memories feel further away than the pigeons perched outside my window, cooing and strutting along the fire escape like they own the building. Maybe they do. Maybe they've been here longer than any of us. Lately, Emily has been distant. I thought maybe she was just busy, overwhelmed with her life in Manhattan's fast-paced world. She works in marketing for some big company with a glass tower that scrapes the sky. She lives in Chelsea now, in one of those modern apartments with floor-to-ceiling windows and granite countertops. When she first moved there 5 years ago, she invited me over for dinner. I remember taking the subway into the city, clutching my purse and trying not to look like exactly what I was, an old woman from Queens who didn't belong in her daughter's polished world. The apartment was beautiful. Cold, but beautiful. Everything was white and gray and sharp-edged. There were no family photos, no soft places to rest your eyes. The couch looked like it had never been sat on, and the kitchen gleamed like an operating room. Emily served organic salmon and quinoa salad, foods I'd never heard of when I was raising her on pasta and hamburger helper. "Do you like it, Mom?" she asked, gesturing around the space with a wine glass that probably cost more than I spend on groceries in a month. "It's very modern," I said, because I didn't know how to say that it felt like living inside a magazine, pretty to look at, but impossible to imagine making memories there. Where would a child color at the coffee table? Where would you curl up with a book on a rainy day? Where were the soft corners that caught the light just right, the places that felt like home? But Emily seemed happy, and that's all I wanted. All I've ever wanted. The distance started small. Missed phone calls that went unreturned for days. Invitations politely declined with vague excuses about work or travel or social obligations I couldn't picture. The last time I saw her in person was my birthday 6 months ago. She came to Queens for exactly 1 hour, brought me a gift card to Macy's, and spent most of the visit checking her phone. "I have to get back to the city," she said, barely touching the chocolate cake I'd made from scratch. "There's a work thing. There's always a work thing now." When she ignored my calls for days, and then that text blasted through like a thunderclap, I knew the bruises ran deeper than I'd admitted to myself. The message came through while I was sitting at my kitchen table, paying bills with checks written in my careful, spidery handwriting. The phone buzzed, and when I read those words, the pen slipped from my fingers and left a blue ink stain across the electric bill. "Mom, I threw everything you left here out. Don't contact me again. I read it 3 times before it sank in. Everything I left there. What did that mean? The few things I kept at her apartment for when I visited? My reading glasses that I always forgot? The cardigan I left hanging in her closet? Or something bigger? Something I couldn't yet imagine? I was shattered, but beneath that, a storm of confusion brewed. Why? Why now? What had I done to deserve this sudden, brutal dismissal? As I sat there in my quiet apartment, listening to the radiator's familiar complaints and the sounds of my neighbors living their lives through the thin walls, I wondered if I had ever truly mattered to her. Let me tell you about the years when Emily was everything to me. When she was the sun I orbited around, the reason I got up every morning, the future I was building one sacrifice at a time. I raised Emily alone. Her father, David, left when she was just 2 years old. I remember the day he packed his things into garbage bags and told me he'd found himself, whatever that meant. Apparently, finding himself meant moving to California with a woman 20 years younger who didn't have stretch marks or crow's feet or a toddler with sticky fingers and endless questions. I need space to grow, Maggie, he said, not meeting my eyes as he folded his shirts. This isn't what I wanted my life to look like. What I wanted to say was, what about what I wanted? What about the promises we made? What about your daughter, who calls you daddy and runs to the door every evening expecting you to walk through it? But I said nothing. I watched him leave and then held Emily on my lap while she cried for her daddy who wasn't coming home. I was 28 years old, working as a waitress at Mickey's Diner in Brooklyn Heights. It was one of those old-fashioned places with red vinyl booths and coffee that could wake the dead. I worked double shifts most days, always with a smile painted on my face even when exhaustion stole my voice and made my feet swell in my sensible white shoes. The customers liked me. I was good at remembering how they took their coffee, what they ordered every Tuesday, whether they had grandchildren or diabetes or jobs they hated. Another coffee, hon? I'd ask, pot in hand, even when my back ached from being on my feet for 10 hours straight. The tips weren't much, but every dollar, every quarter, every crumpled bill left on Formica tables became Emily's future. I kept a mason jar on my dresser, labeled Emily's Dreams, in my careful cursive. Every night, I'd empty my pockets and count the day's earnings. Everything went toward her: school books, music lessons, dance classes, the soccer cleats she needed for the team all her friends were joining. I remember the winter Emily was 12 and wanted a violin. She'd heard one at a school assembly and became obsessed with the idea of making that same haunting, beautiful sound. The violin teacher said she had natural talent, real potential, but lessons cost more than my weekly grocery budget, and a decent student violin cost even more. I worked extra shifts that February, picking up every holiday and weekend I could. I skipped buying groceries for a week, eating peanut butter sandwiches for every meal while Emily had proper dinners of meat and vegetables. I sold my mother's jewelry, pieces I'd planned to pass down to Emily someday, to a pawn shop in Forest Hills. The night I surprised her with the violin, her face lit up like the 4th of July. She held it like it was made of spun gold, her small fingers careful on the strings. "Mom, you don't have to do this," she said, but her eyes were shining with tears of joy. "This must have cost so much money." "Nothing's too much for my girl," I told her, meaning every word. "You're going to make beautiful music." And she did. For 2 years, she practiced every day after school, filling our small apartment with scales and eventually with actual melodies. I came home from double shifts to the sound of her violin, and it made everything worthwhile. The sore feet, the grease stains on my uniform, the way some customers talked down to me like I was invisible, none of it mattered when I heard my daughter make music. But then Emily turned 14 and discovered boys and shopping and wanting to fit in with kids whose parents bought them designer clothes and smartphones. The violin gathered dust in our closet, and when I asked about lessons, she rolled her eyes. "That's so lame, Mom. Nobody plays violin anymore." The teacher called to say Emily had stopped showing up. I paid for 3 more months of lessons she never attended, hoping she'd change her mind. She never did. This became the pattern of our lives. Emily would want something desperately: art supplies, dance classes, a class trip to Washington, D.C. I'd move heaven and earth to make it happen, working extra hours, selling things, choosing between paying the electric bill or buying her what she needed to keep up with her classmates. And then she'd lose interest and move on to something else, leaving me holding the receipts and the debt. But I told myself this was normal. This was what good mothers did. They sacrificed. They put their children's dreams ahead of their own needs. They worked themselves to the bone to give their babies opportunities they never had. When Emily got accepted to Columbia University, I cried harder than she did. My daughter was going to be a college graduate. She was going to have the kind of life I'd only dreamed about, the kind where you worked with your mind instead of your hands, where people respected your opinions and you never had to smile and say, "Yes, sir," to men who looked right through you. The tuition was astronomical. Even with financial aid, the remaining costs were more than I made in 6 months. I took out loans I knew I'd never be able to pay back. I moved to an even smaller apartment to save money. I ate ramen noodles for dinner most nights and told Emily I was on a diet when she asked why I'd lost so much weight. "Are you sure you can afford this, Mom?" she asked one day during her sophomore year when I'd mentioned maybe not being able to visit for parents' weekend because I couldn't afford the train ticket. "Don't you worry about money, sweetheart," I said. "You just focus on your studies. I'll figure it out." And I did figure it out. I figured out how to work 3 jobs. I figured out how to smile when landlords raised my rent. I figured out how to make a package of ground beef last a week and how to darn holes in stockings I couldn't afford to replace. Emily graduated magna cum laude with a degree in business and marketing. At her graduation, I sat in the family section wearing a dress I'd bought at Goodwill and shoes that pinched my feet, but I'd never been prouder. When she walked across that stage and accepted her diploma, I felt like I could fly. All those years of sacrifice, all those sleepless nights worrying about money, all those meals I'd skipped to make sure she had everything she needed, it had all been worth it. After graduation, Emily got a job at a prestigious marketing firm in Manhattan. She moved into a studio apartment that cost more per month than I'd ever made, but she was living her dream, and that was enough for me. I assumed we'd stay close. I thought maybe now that the financial pressure was off, now that she was launched into her successful life, we could just be together. Mother and daughter. Friends, even. But that's when the distance started. At first, I told myself it was natural. Emily was busy building her career, making new friends, dating. She needed space to become the woman she was meant to be. When she didn't call for weeks at a time, I convinced myself she was just overwhelmed with adult responsibilities. The subtle changes were like a slow poison. The enthusiasm in her voice when she answered my calls gradually faded into politeness, then obligation, then irritation. "I'm busy, Mom," became her standard response to any invitation, any suggestion that we spend time together. When I'd call to share good news, like the time Mrs. Chen's granddaughter got married and I'd helped with the flowers, Emily would respond with distracted hms that told me she wasn't really listening. When I called with bad news, like when I had to go to the emergency room for chest pains that turned out to be anxiety, she'd express concern but never follow up. Never ask how I was feeling the next day or the next week. The forgotten birthdays hurt the most. Not her forgetting mine, though that stung too. But Emily forgetting her own grandmother's birthday, my mother who'd lived with us for Emily's last 2 years of high school and who'd helped take care of Emily when I was working. Emily forgot the anniversary of my mother's death. She forgot the date I'd been laid off from Mickey's Diner after 15 years when they renovated and decided they wanted younger, prettier servers. "You don't understand my life anymore," she said once when I'd gently suggested maybe we could have lunch together. "Things are different now. I have responsibilities." As if I'd never had responsibilities. As if raising her alone, putting her through college, working multiple jobs for 30 years hadn't been responsibilities. As if I'd just been sitting around doing nothing all those years, waiting for her to grace me with her presence. The cold silences were louder than any argument. When I asked about visiting her apartment, the pause before she answered lasted so long I wondered if the call had dropped. When I mentioned feeling lonely, she'd change the subject to her work or her social life or anything but me sitting alone in my apartment, counting the days since we'd last talked. The subtle manipulations cut deeper than outright rejections would have. The phone calls that went straight to voicemail when she knew I needed her. The text messages that took days to answer, if they got answered at all. The way she'd mention dinners with friends, vacations with coworkers, weekend plans that never included me, as if she wanted me to know how full her life was without me in it. But I kept forgiving. I kept making excuses. I kept telling myself that love meant being patient, being understanding, being whatever she needed me to be even if what she needed was for me to disappear. When Emily met Richard, I thought things might change. Richard was a lawyer from Connecticut, the kind of man who wore expensive suits and had season tickets to the Yankees. They got married in a ceremony I helped pay for but barely felt welcome at. In the wedding photos, I'm standing at the edge of every group shot, smiling my practiced waitress smile while Richard's family fills the center of every frame. At the reception, I sat at a table with Emily's college friends I'd never met, trying to make conversation while they talked about restaurants I'd never been to and trips to places I'd never see. Emily was radiant in her designer dress, dancing with her new husband under lights that sparkled like stars. She looked so sophisticated, so confident, so far removed from the little girl who used to curl up in my lap and ask me to tell her stories. During the mother-daughter dance, Emily held me at arm's length and smiled for the photographer, but her eyes were already looking over my shoulder at her new life, her new family, her new future that clearly didn't have much room for the woman who'd made it all possible. After the wedding, the distance became even greater. Emily had responsibilities to Richard's family now. Holiday dinners at his parents' house in Connecticut. Vacations to their house in the Hamptons. Social obligations with people who mattered in ways I apparently never had. "We're going to Richard's parents for Thanksgiving," she'd tell me casually, as if it were obvious that I wasn't invited, as if it hadn't occurred to her that I might not have anywhere else to go. I started spending holidays alone, heating up a frozen dinner and pretending I didn't hear other families laughing through the thin walls of my apartment building. Mrs. Chen would sometimes invite me over, and I'd make polite conversation with her family while secretly wondering if my own daughter was carving turkey or sharing what she was grateful for with people who barely knew her. The doubt crept in slowly, like water through a cracked foundation. Was I just a safety net she'd outgrown? Had I ever been more than a convenient source of funding and emotional labor? When she looked at me, did she see her mother, or just an embarrassing reminder of where she came from? I started to wonder if the sacrifices had been worth it. If all those years of putting her needs first, of going without so she could have everything, had actually hurt more than helped. Maybe I'd made her too comfortable taking from me. Maybe I'd taught her that my love came without conditions, without limits, without any expectation that it would be returned. But I pushed those thoughts away. Good mothers don't expect gratitude, I told myself. Good mothers give freely, without keeping score. Love isn't supposed to be transactional. Except maybe it is, a little. Maybe love is supposed to flow both ways. Maybe even mothers deserve to be treated with respect and consideration and basic human kindness. The thought scared me more than I wanted to admit. Last spring, my arthritis flared terribly. The pain started in my hands, making it hard to grip things, hard to write checks or open jars or even hold a coffee cup steady. Then it spread to my knees, making every step feel like walking on broken glass. Some mornings, I could barely get out of bed. Emily knew about my arthritis. I'd mentioned it during one of our infrequent phone calls, trying not to sound like I was complaining, trying to keep my voice light and conversational. "Oh, you know how it is when you get older," I'd said when she asked how I was doing. "A few aches and pains, nothing serious." But it was serious. Some days, I couldn't open my prescription bottles without using a kitchen knife to pry off the childproof caps. I couldn't carry groceries up the 3 flights of stairs to my apartment without stopping to rest on every landing, gasping for breath and praying my neighbors wouldn't see me struggling. One morning in late April, I woke with a fever that made the room spin every time I tried to sit up. My hands were so swollen I couldn't grip the thermometer, couldn't twist open the bottle of aspirin, couldn't even turn the doorknob to let myself out of my apartment to get help. I lay in bed, shivering under every blanket I owned, waiting for the fever to break or for someone to notice I was in trouble. I waited for Emily's call. She usually called on Sunday afternoons, a duty call that lasted exactly 10 minutes and covered the basics. Was I eating enough? Was the apartment too cold? Did I need anything from the store? It was Saturday morning when the fever hit, so I just had to make it through one day. Surely she'd call, and I could tell her I wasn't feeling well, and she'd come help me or at least tell me what to do. But Sunday came and went. No call. Monday passed in a blur of fever dreams and sips of water from a glass I'd filled before I got sick. Tuesday, I managed to drag myself to the kitchen and eat a few crackers, but my phone stayed silent. Wednesday morning, the fever finally broke, leaving me weak and shaky but clear-headed enough to realize that Emily hadn't called in over a week. I dialed her number with trembling fingers, and when she answered, her voice was bright and cheerful, like nothing in the world could be wrong. "Hi, Mom. How are you?" "I've been sick," I said, my voice hoarse from days of not talking to anyone. "Really sick. I had a fever and couldn't get out of bed." "Oh no, that's terrible," she said, but I could hear keyboard clicking in the background. "Are you feeling better now?" "A little. I was hoping maybe you could come over for a few hours." "I don't have any groceries, and I'm still pretty weak." More keyboard clicking. "I wish I could, but this week is absolutely insane at work. We're launching a new campaign and I'm basically living at the office. Can you order groceries online? They deliver now, you know." I didn't know how to order groceries online. I didn't even own a computer. But I didn't say that. I just said I'd figure something out and listen to her tell me about her exciting new project while my empty refrigerator hummed in the background. That's when I realized she didn't really care if I lived or died. Oh, she'd care if something happened to me. She'd arrange a nice funeral and probably cry appropriately and tell people what a good mother I'd been. But she didn't care enough to spend an hour making sure I had food to eat when I was too sick to take care of myself. The realization should have hurt more than it did. Instead, it felt almost like relief. I'd been wondering if I was imagining the distance, the indifference, the way she treated me like an obligation rather than a person. Now I knew I wasn't imagining anything. Mrs. Chen ended up bringing me soup and medicine. Mrs. Chen, who barely spoke English and had her own family to worry about, cared more about my well-being than my own daughter did. 2 weeks later, when I mustered the strength to visit Emily's apartment in Chelsea, something I rarely did because she always made me feel like I was intruding, I found something that should have prepared me for that devastating text message, but somehow didn't. I had a key to Emily's apartment. She'd given it to me years ago, back when we still pretended we were close, back when she traveled for work and needed someone to water her plants and bring in her mail. I hadn't used it in over a year, but that day, I needed to use her bathroom and couldn't figure out the fancy intercom system in the lobby. The apartment was messier than I'd ever seen it. Mail scattered across the kitchen counter, clothes draped over furniture, dishes piled in the sink. Emily was always so pristine, so put together, so it surprised me to see evidence that she was human after all. But what stopped me cold was what I saw spread across her dining room table: papers, documents, official-looking forms with signatures and stamps and legal language I couldn't quite understand. My reading glasses were at home, so I had to squint to make out the words, but what I saw made my blood run cold. My name was on these papers. My signature, though I couldn't remember signing anything. Property transfer forms. Deeds. Something about power of attorney. My address in Queens, the apartment I'd lived in for 15 years, the home I'd never agreed to sell or transfer or sign over to anyone. I gathered up the papers with shaking hands, trying to read through the legal jargon, trying to understand what I was looking at. There were bank statements showing deposits I'd never made, checks I'd never written, transactions that transferred money from accounts I didn't know I had. But the cruelest blow was waiting in the mailbox downstairs. When I pushed Emily's key into the little brass lock, my hands were shaking so hard I could barely turn it. Inside, mixed in with her credit card bills and magazine subscriptions, was an envelope addressed to me. Margaret Thompson, but with Emily's address in Chelsea. Inside was an eviction notice. From my own landlord. Dated 3 weeks ago. Giving me 30 days to vacate the apartment in Queens, the apartment I'd lived in for 15 years, the apartment I'd always paid rent on time for, the apartment that was the only stable thing in my increasingly unstable world. But it wasn't signed by my landlord, Mr. Martinez, who'd taken over the building from his father and who always asked about Emily when he collected the rent. This notice was signed by Emily. Emily, who somehow had become my landlord without my knowledge or consent. Emily, who was evicting her own mother from her home. I read it 3 times before the words sank in. She had bought my building. Bought it using money she'd somehow accessed from accounts I didn't know existed. Bought it and then immediately served me with an eviction notice, as if I were just another troublesome tenant instead of the woman who had raised her, sacrificed for her, loved her unconditionally for 35 years. The realization crushed something vital inside me. Not just my heart, though that was certainly broken. Something deeper, more fundamental. My faith in the basic goodness of the person I'd created, raised, shaped into the woman she'd become. I sat on Emily's expensive leather couch, holding the eviction notice in my trembling hands, and tried to understand how we'd gotten here. How the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms had become someone who would steal my home and throw me out like garbage. The question that haunted me wasn't why she wanted me gone. I could almost understand that. I was old, inconvenient, a reminder of a life she'd worked hard to escape. The question was why she'd chosen cruelty over honesty. Why she couldn't just tell me she wanted me out of her life instead of manipulating me, forging my signature, stealing from me. I tried to call her from her own apartment, using her landline that she probably forgot she even had. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail, and I listened to her confident, professional voice asking me to leave a message and she'd get back to me as soon as possible. "Emily, it's Mom," I said after the beep, my voice cracking. "I'm at your apartment, and I found some papers with my name on them. Legal papers. And there's an eviction notice. I don't understand what's happening. Please call me." She never called back. I took the subway home to Queens that day, clutching the papers and the eviction notice in my purse like evidence of a crime I couldn't quite name. The train was crowded with young professionals heading home from work, all of them confident and polished and focused on their phones, probably texting people who loved them, making plans with people who wanted to see them. I watched them and wondered if any of their mothers were sitting alone in small apartments, counting the days since their last conversation, making excuses for why their adult children never had time for them anymore. When I got home, I walked through my small apartment seeing it with new eyes. This place I'd called home for 15 years, where I'd raised Emily through her teenage years, where I'd celebrated her graduation and her wedding and all the milestones she'd allowed me to be part of, it wasn't really mine anymore. Had never really been mine, apparently. I looked at the family photos lining my shelves, the carefully dusted memories of better times, and wondered if Emily looked at those same moments and saw something completely different. Maybe when she saw the photo of us at the Museum of Natural History, she didn't remember feeling loved and cherished. Maybe she remembered feeling trapped, burdened by a mother who loved her too much and expected too much in return. Maybe I'd been fooling myself all these years, thinking I was a good mother when really I'd been a burden she couldn't wait to escape. The anguish blurred my vision as I tried to make sense of what I'd discovered. How long had she been planning this? How many papers had I unknowingly signed? How much of my life had she taken control of without my knowledge? I was making myself a cup of tea, my hands still shaking from the afternoon's revelations, when the ceramic cup slipped from my grasp and shattered against the kitchen floor. The crash was sharp and final, like an exclamation point at the end of a sentence I didn't want to finish. The broken pieces scattered across the linoleum, white porcelain mixed with brown tea and my own silent tears. I knelt to pick up the larger pieces, cutting my finger on a sharp edge, and watched my blood mix with the spilled tea. That's when I cried. Really cried, for the first time in years. Not the quiet tears I'd shed during lonely holidays or the frustrated tears that came with impossible bills. This was deeper, rawer. The sound of something fundamental breaking inside me. I cried for the little girl Emily used to be, the one who thought I hung the moon and wanted to be just like me when she grew up. I cried for all the sacrifices that had meant nothing, all the love that had been taken for granted, all the dreams I'd deferred so she could chase hers. But mostly, I cried for the woman I'd become without realizing it, small, forgotten, disposable. When had I become someone who could be evicted from her own life without anyone noticing or caring? As I cleaned up the broken cup, I made a decision. Actually, it felt less like a decision and more like a recognition of something that was already true. I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep accepting scraps of affection from someone who clearly wished I would just disappear. For the first time in my life, I considered saying no. No more sacrifices. No more excuses. No more begging for scraps of respect from someone who should love me but clearly didn't. No more pretending that being a good mother meant accepting whatever treatment my daughter chose to give me. But the fear haunted me, the empty streets, the cold apartments, loneliness clawing at my ribs like a living thing. Could I survive on my own? Did I have the strength to start over at 72? What if saying no meant losing her completely? Then I realized I'd already lost her. Maybe years ago, maybe the day she graduated from college and didn't need my money anymore, maybe the day she got married and gained a new family that actually appreciated her. Whenever it had happened, it was already over. I just hadn't been brave enough to admit it. I spent that night packing away the family photos, wrapping them in old newspapers and storing them in boxes I pushed into the back of my bedroom closet. If I was going to be erased from Emily's life, maybe it was time to erase her from mine. At midnight, I stood before the cracked mirror in my bathroom, searching for a reflection I barely recognized. The woman looking back at me had gray hair that needed styling, lines around her eyes that told the story of decades of worry, hands that were spotted with age and swollen with arthritis. But there was something else there too. Something I hadn't seen in a long time. A spark of anger, maybe. Or determination. Or just the simple recognition that I deserved better than this. Was this the beginning of the end? Or something new? The answer came sooner than I expected. Have you ever reached a point where you couldn't ignore the truth anymore? Where the evidence was so overwhelming that all your excuses and justifications crumbled like old paper? That's where I found myself when Emily finally responded to my message about the eviction notice. She didn't call. She texted. We need to talk. Come to dinner Sunday. No apology. No explanation. Just a command, as if I were an employee being summoned to a meeting with my boss. I should have refused. I should have demanded answers over the phone or insisted she come to Queens to explain herself. But decades of conditioning are hard to break. When your child calls, you go. Even when that child has apparently been systematically dismantling your life behind your back. The Sunday dinner was at a restaurant in Midtown, one of those trendy places where the portions are tiny and the prices are astronomical. Emily and Richard were already seated when I arrived, looking like the successful power couple they'd become. Emily wore a black dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and Richard had his phone out, typing with the kind of urgency reserved for truly important people. "Hi, Mom," Emily said when I approached their table. She stood and gave me the kind of hug you give to distant relatives at funerals, brief, polite, empty of real affection. I sat across from them, feeling overdressed in my best blouse from JCPenney and underdressed for the kind of establishment where water probably cost $10 a glass. The server, a young woman about Emily's age, handed me a menu without making eye contact, as if she could tell I didn't belong there. "How are you feeling?" Emily asked, and for a moment, I thought she was asking about my recent illness. Then I realized she was talking about the eviction notice, about the documents I'd found, about the life-changing betrayal I'd discovered scattered across her dining room table. "Confused," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I don't understand what's happening. Why is my name on papers I never signed? Why am I being evicted from my own home?" Richard looked up from his phone just long enough to exchange a glance with Emily. It was the kind of look married couples share when they've rehearsed this conversation, when they've already decided how it's going to go. "Mom," Emily said, her voice taking on the patient tone she might use with a confused child. "You signed those papers months ago. You asked me to help you with your finances, remember? You said you were getting overwhelmed with all the bills and the paperwork." I stared at her, trying to remember any such conversation. Had I asked for help? Had I complained about bills or paperwork? Maybe I had mentioned that managing money was getting more difficult as I got older. Maybe I had signed something without reading it carefully, trusting that my daughter wouldn't take advantage of me. "I don't remember asking you to buy my building," I said. "I don't remember agreeing to be evicted." "We're not evicting you, Mom. We're helping you transition to a more appropriate living situation. Something safer, more manageable for someone your age." Someone my age. As if being 72 automatically made me incompetent, unable to make decisions about my own life. What kind of living situation? Another glance between Emily and Richard. "There's a lovely assisted living facility in New Jersey. Very affordable, lots of activities for seniors. You'll make friends, have people to talk to instead of sitting alone in that apartment all the time." "I don't want to live in New Jersey. I don't want to live in assisted living. I want to live in my own home." "That apartment isn't safe for you anymore," Emily said, her voice growing firmer. 3 flights of stairs, no elevator, no one checking on you. What if you fall? What if you have another health crisis and no one knows? Mrs. Chen checks on me. The neighbors look out for each other. Mrs. Chen is older than you are, Mom. And she doesn't speak English well enough to help in a real emergency. Richard spoke for the first time. "We're thinking about what's best for everyone here, Margaret. The building needs renovations that would disrupt your life anyway. This way, you'll have professional care, proper medical supervision, and Emily won't have to worry about you constantly." There it was. The truth wrapped in consideration and concern. Emily wanted me somewhere else, somewhere I'd be someone else's responsibility, somewhere she could visit when it was convenient and forget about me when it wasn't. "I can't afford assisted living," I said. "The sale of your apartment will cover the initial costs," Emily said. "And you have Social Security, plus the small pension from the diner." They'd thought of everything. They'd calculated my worth, weighed my options, made decisions about my future without including me in the conversation. I was being managed, handled, disposed of as efficiently as possible. What if I say no? Emily's mask of concern slipped just slightly. "Mom, you're not being reasonable. You can't live alone anymore. It's not safe." "What if I say no?" I repeated. Richard cleared his throat. "The sale is already in process. The papers have been filed. We're not trying to hurt you, but these decisions need to be made." "By whom? By you?" "By my daughter who hasn't visited me in months, who didn't call when I was sick, who apparently bought my home without telling me." "You're upset," Emily said. "I understand. Change is hard. But you'll see that this is for the best." The server appeared to take our order, and I realized I hadn't even looked at the menu. Everything on it was described in French or contained ingredients I'd never heard of. Emily ordered for me, something light and healthy that she thought I might like, as if I were a child who couldn't be trusted to feed herself. We sat in silence until the food arrived. Emily talked about her work, about Richard's latest case, about their plans for a vacation in Europe. She talked around me, about me, but not to me, as if I were already gone, already tucked away in the New Jersey facility where I could be visited on holidays and forgotten the rest of the time. I picked at my salmon and quinoa salad, watching my daughter discuss my future as if I weren't sitting right across from her. When had I become invisible? When had my opinions stopped mattering, my preferences stopped being considered? "I won't go," I said quietly, interrupting a story about Richard's golf game. "What? I won't go to New Jersey. I won't go to assisted living. I won't be managed and handled and disposed of like furniture you don't want anymore." Emily's eyes flashed with something, anger, frustration, maybe just impatience with a conversation that was taking longer than she'd planned. Mom, you don't have a choice. The apartment is sold. The papers are signed. This is happening whether you like it or not. Papers I didn't knowingly sign. Documents you had me execute under false pretenses. That's called fraud, Emily. Richard leaned forward, his lawyer instincts kicking in. That's a very serious accusation, Margaret. I hope you're not suggesting that. I'm not suggesting anything, I said, standing up from the table. I'm stating a fact. My daughter stole my home and is trying to have me committed to a facility against my will. If that's not fraud, it's something very close to it. Other diners were starting to stare, drawn by the tension at our table. Emily's face flushed with embarrassment, and I realized that was what bothered her most, not that she'd betrayed me, but that people might witness the betrayal. Sit down, Mom. You're making a scene. Good, I said, louder than necessary. Maybe someone should see what's happening here. Maybe someone should witness how you treat the woman who raised you. I left the restaurant without looking back, Emily's voice following me to the door as she tried to minimize the damage, to explain to the other diners that I was old, confused, not myself lately. But I was exactly myself. For the first time in years, I was exactly who I was meant to be, a woman who wouldn't accept being bullied, manipulated, or discarded by anyone, including her own daughter. The confrontation at the restaurant was just the beginning. Over the next few days, Emily launched what I can only describe as an emotional campaign to break down my resistance and force me into compliance. First came the guilt. Phone calls where she cried about how worried she was, how she hadn't slept since our dinner, how she was only trying to take care of me because she loved me so much. She painted herself as the dutiful daughter, overwhelmed by the burden of caring for an aging mother who was being unreasonable and ungrateful. I'm scared for you, Mom, she sobbed into the phone. What if something happens and I could have prevented it? How am I supposed to live with that? But I'd heard variations of this speech before, during every conflict we'd ever had. Emily was an expert at flipping the script, making herself the victim whenever she was confronted with her own behavior. I'd fallen for it countless times over the years, apologizing for things I hadn't done, accepting blame for problems I hadn't created, smoothing over conflicts by taking responsibility for Emily's emotions. Not this time. You should have thought about that before you forged my signature, I said calmly. You should have considered your concerns before you decided to steal my home. I didn't steal anything. I'm trying to protect you. From what? From living in my own home? From making my own decisions? From having any control over my own life? She hung up on me. Next came the manipulation through others. Richard called, using his lawyer voice to explain that what they'd done was perfectly legal, that they had power of attorney, that they were acting in my best interests whether I understood it or not. Emily is devastated, he said. She's only trying to help, and you're calling her a thief. That's not fair, Margaret. What's not fair is buying someone's home without their knowledge and kicking them out of it. No one's kicking you out. You're being relocated to a safer environment where you'll have access to medical care and social activities. Against my will. Sometimes families have to make difficult decisions. Emily can't spend all her time worrying about you when there are better options available. The message was clear. I was a burden, an inconvenience, a problem that needed to be solved as efficiently as possible. My feelings about the solution were irrelevant. Then came the flying monkeys, Emily's friends and acquaintances who'd been recruited to convince me to see reason. People I barely knew called to tell me how wonderful assisted living could be, how many activities they had, how I'd make new friends and finally have the social life I'd been missing. Emily just wants what's best for you, said a woman named Jennifer who I'd met exactly once at Emily's wedding. She's such a caring daughter. You're so lucky to have someone who worries about you like that. I wanted to ask Jennifer where Emily's care had been when I was sick with fever, where her worry had been during all those months of ignored phone calls and forgotten birthdays. But I didn't. I just listened to one stranger after another tell me how grateful I should be for my daughter's betrayal. The pressure was relentless. Every day brought new calls, new guilt, new explanations of why I was being selfish and unreasonable. Emily and Richard had clearly decided that if they could just wear down my resistance, I'd eventually give in and go quietly to New Jersey. But something unexpected was happening. Instead of wearing me down, the pressure was making me stronger. Every manipulative phone call reminded me of why I'd reached this breaking point in the first place. Every guilt trip confirmed that Emily saw me as an obstacle to be overcome rather than a person deserving of respect. And then there was Mrs. Chen. Mrs. Jenkins, I mean. I don't know why I keep calling her Mrs. Chen. Her name is Dorothy Jenkins, and she's lived across the hall from me for 8 years. She's 75 years old, a widow whose husband died of cancer the year before Emily's wedding. Dorothy heard me crying one night after a particularly brutal phone call from Emily. She knocked on my door at 9 o'clock, carrying a plate of homemade cookies and a box of tissues. "Honey," she said in her soft Carolina accent, "whatever's happening, you don't have to face it alone." I broke down and told her everything. About the papers I'd found, about the eviction notice, about Emily's plan to ship me off to New Jersey so she wouldn't have to deal with me anymore. Dorothy listened without judgment, nodding in all the right places, making sympathetic noises when I described Emily's manipulative tactics. "That girl needs to learn some respect," Dorothy said when I finished. "You don't treat your mama like that, no matter how old she gets." It was the first time in months that someone had taken my side completely, without trying to see Emily's perspective or find middle ground or suggest that maybe I was overreacting. Dorothy was outraged on my behalf, and her outrage felt like a gift. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I don't know. I don't have anywhere to go. She's already sold my apartment, apparently. I can't afford a lawyer to fight her." "You know what you need to do," Dorothy said. "You need to stop letting her push you around. You need to show her that you're not some old lady she can manipulate and control." "But I am an old lady. I am 72 years old with arthritis and not much money and no one else in the world who cares if I live or die." "Bullshit," Dorothy said, and hearing that word in her sweet southern voice made me laugh for the first time in days. "You're 72 years old with arthritis and not much money, but you're not alone. And you're sure as hell not helpless." She was right. I wasn't helpless. I was just scared and tired and overwhelmed by the enormity of fighting back against someone I'd spent 35 years trying to please. But fear wasn't a good enough reason to let Emily destroy what was left of my independence. "There's a legal aid clinic downtown," Dorothy said. "My neighbor's daughter works there. They help people who can't afford lawyers. You should talk to them." The next morning, I took the subway to Manhattan for the first time in months. The legal aid clinic was in a rundown building near the courthouse, crowded with people who looked like they'd run out of options. The receptionist, a tired-looking woman about Emily's age, handed me a form to fill out and told me someone would see me when they could. I waited for 3 hours, watching lawyers and social workers rush between offices, phones ringing constantly, everyone moving with the urgent energy of people trying to save the world one case at a time. When my name was finally called, I followed a young man with kind eyes and rumpled clothes into an office barely bigger than a closet. "I'm James Peterson," he said, shaking my hand with surprising gentleness. "I understand you're having some issues with property fraud?" I told him the whole story, showing him copies of the documents I'd found at Emily's apartment, the eviction notice, the bank statements showing transactions I hadn't authorized. James listened carefully, taking notes, asking questions that proved he understood the legal implications better than I did. "This is definitely fraud," he said when I finished. "Your daughter used her power of attorney to exceed the authority you gave her. She can't just sell your property and relocate you without your informed consent." "But I did sign papers. Maybe I gave her more authority than I remember." "Even if you signed a broad power of attorney, it doesn't give her the right to act against your clearly expressed wishes. And it certainly doesn't give her the right to forge your signature or misrepresent transactions to you." For the first time since I'd found those papers, I felt like I might have some power in this situation. James explained my options, the legal steps we could take to reverse what Emily had done, the process for recovering my property and regaining control of my finances. "It won't be easy," he warned. "Family disputes are always complicated, and your daughter will probably claim she was acting in your best interests. But you have rights, Mrs. Thompson. No one can take those away from you, not even family." I walked out of that office feeling lighter than I had in months. Not because the problem was solved, it would take time and paperwork and probably some ugly confrontations with Emily and Richard, but because someone had listened to me and believed me and told me I deserved better. The first thing I did was call Emily. "Mom, I've been so worried," she said when she answered, her voice syrupy with fake concern. "You haven't returned my calls." "I've been busy," I said. "Busy with what? Are you feeling okay? You sound different." "I'm feeling better than I have in a long time, actually. I wanted to let you know that I've consulted with a lawyer about what you and Richard have done." Silence. Then, "Mom, you don't understand the legal complexities. I understand fraud," I said. "I understand forgery. I understand that what you've done is illegal, and I'm not going to let you get away with it. You're being ridiculous. We're trying to help you. Then help me by reversing every transaction you made without my knowledge. Help me by returning control of my finances to me. Help me by treating me like a human being instead of a problem to be solved." "I can't do that. The sale is already in progress. The new owners are depending on, then you better figure out how to undo it," I said. "Because I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not going to disappear quietly just because that would be convenient for you. I hung up before she could respond. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Not because my problems were solved, but because I'd finally found my voice. I'd finally stopped trying to be the accommodating, understanding mother who never caused problems or made demands. I was done being small and grateful and invisible. The transformation didn't happen overnight. Years of conditioning don't disappear because you have one good day or one supportive conversation. But it was a beginning. James called the next week to tell me he'd filed paperwork to halt the sale of my building and freeze the accounts Emily had been accessing. He'd also contacted Emily's lawyer, Richard, essentially, to inform them that their actions were being challenged legally. They want to meet, James said. Probably to try to work out some kind of settlement. Are you interested? I thought about it. Part of me wanted to avoid another confrontation, to find some middle ground that would preserve what was left of my relationship with Emily. But I'd tried compromise before. I'd spent 35 years trying to keep the peace, and where had it gotten me? I'll meet with them, I said. But I'm not negotiating away my rights just to avoid hurting their feelings. The meeting was scheduled for the following week at Richard's law firm, one of those intimidating glass towers in Midtown where the elevators are faster than the subway and the receptionists look like models. James met me in the lobby, looking professional in his one good suit, carrying a briefcase that had seen better days but stood firm when it counted. Emily and Richard were already in the conference room when we arrived, surrounded by what appeared to be a small army of lawyers and assistants. They'd brought reinforcements, as if they were preparing for a war rather than sorting out a misunderstanding with an elderly woman. Emily looked terrible. Dark circles under her eyes, her usually perfect hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, her hands shaking slightly as she pretended to read through papers she'd probably memorized already. For a moment, I felt sorry for her. Then I remembered the eviction notice and the forged signatures, and the sympathy evaporated. Richard started with his lawyer voice, explaining how they'd acted within their legal authority, how they'd made decisions based on medical concerns and safety issues, how they were prepared to defend their actions in court if necessary. But we'd prefer to reach an amicable resolution, he said, as if he were doing me a favor by not destroying me completely. James responded with his own legal language, outlining the fraud charges we were prepared to file, the evidence we had of unauthorized transactions, the pattern of financial abuse that could result in criminal charges as well as civil penalties. I listened to them talk about me as if I weren't there, as if my life were a legal problem to be negotiated between professionals. Finally, I'd heard enough. Stop, I said. Both lawyers turned to look at me with surprise, as if they'd forgotten I was allowed to speak. This isn't about legal technicalities. This isn't about medical concerns or safety issues or amicable resolutions. I stood up, my arthritis protesting but my voice strong. Emily, look at me. She raised her eyes reluctantly, and I saw something there I hadn't expected. Shame. Guilt. Maybe even traces of the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. I raised you better than this, I said. I taught you right from wrong. I showed you what love looks like, what respect means. And this, I gestured to the conference room, the lawyers, the elaborate scheme to control my life, this is not love. This is not respect. This is cruelty disguised as care, and I won't tolerate it anymore. Mom, please, I will no longer buy love from you or anyone else. I will no longer accept scraps of affection in exchange for my dignity. I will no longer pretend that being your mother means I deserve less respect than you'd show a stranger. The room was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sounds of Manhattan traffic 40 floors below. Respect me or lose me, I said. Those are your options. I'm done with everything in between. Emily started to cry then, but they weren't the manipulative tears she'd used during our restaurant confrontation. These were real tears, the kind that come from somewhere deep and painful and true. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. I don't know how to take care of you without taking over your life. I don't know how to help without controlling. I'm scared you're going to die, and it will be my fault for not doing enough. There it was. The truth underneath all the fraud and manipulation and legal maneuvering. Emily was terrified of losing me, but she didn't know how to love me without consuming me. She'd learned from watching me sacrifice myself for her that love meant giving up everything for the people you care about. But I'd been a terrible teacher, apparently. I'd shown her that mothers exist to serve, to sacrifice, to disappear gradually until nothing is left but the function they perform for others. No wonder she saw taking control of my life as an act of love. It's what I'd taught her love looked like. I'm not your responsibility, I said gently. I'm your mother. There's a difference. We talked for another hour, not as lawyers and clients but as a mother and daughter trying to figure out how to love each other without destroying what was left of both of us. Emily agreed to reverse the property sale and return control of my finances to me. I agreed to discuss my living situation honestly, to consider reasonable safety modifications to my apartment, to accept help when I actually needed it instead of struggling alone out of pride. But the most important thing we agreed on was this: our relationship would be based on mutual respect from now on. Emily couldn't manage my life for my own good, and I couldn't sacrifice my dignity for the sake of keeping peace. It sounds simple when I say it like that. But simple and easy are two different things entirely. We left the law office that day with a tentative truce, but I knew the real work was just beginning. 35 years of dysfunctional patterns don't disappear because you have one honest conversation in a conference room. Emily called me the next evening. "How are you feeling?" she asked, and for the first time in years, it sounded like she actually wanted to know. "Scared," I said honestly. "But better. Like I can breathe again." "I'm scared too. I keep thinking about all the things I've done, all the ways I've treated you, and I don't understand how I became this person." "You became the person I taught you to be," I said. "I showed you that mothers don't have boundaries, that we don't deserve respect, that our only value comes from what we can do for our children. I'm as much to blame for this as you are." "That's not true, Mom. You were a good mother. You are a good mother." "I was a mother who forgot to be a person. I was so busy teaching you that you mattered, I forgot to show you that I mattered too." We cried together over the phone that night, mourning the years we'd lost to misunderstanding and manipulation, grieving the relationship we could have had if we'd both been braver earlier. But we also talked about the future. About the kind of relationship we wanted to build, the boundaries we needed to establish, the way we could love each other without losing ourselves in the process. It was the beginning of something new. Not the fairy tale reconciliation where everything goes back to the way it was, but something better. Something real. The next few months weren't easy. There were setbacks and arguments and moments when we both fell back into old patterns. Emily would offer to help with something and end up taking over completely. I would ask for support and then resent it when she provided it. We had to learn new ways of being together, new ways of caring for each other that didn't involve one of us disappearing. But there were good moments too. Moments when Emily called just to talk, not because she needed something or was checking up on me, but because she wanted to hear my voice. Moments when I shared an opinion or made a decision without immediately apologizing for it or asking if it was okay with her. The apartment sale was reversed, as James had promised. Emily lost some money in the process, fees and penalties and legal costs, but she never complained about it. She even helped me paint the kitchen a cheerful yellow color I'd always wanted but never thought I deserved. "Why yellow?" she asked as we stood back to admire our work. "Because it's happy," I said. "Because I want to wake up every morning in a place that feels like joy." She smiled at that, and I saw something in her face I hadn't seen since she was a child, genuine pleasure in my happiness, not because it reflected well on her or solved a problem for her, but just because she loved me and wanted good things for me. We decorated the newly painted kitchen together, hanging curtains I picked out myself and arranging fresh flowers from the market in a vase Emily brought from her apartment. For the first time in years, my home felt like it belonged to me. But the most significant change wasn't in my apartment or even in my relationship with Emily. It was in how I saw myself. Dorothy had mentioned that the community center a few blocks away offered painting classes for seniors. I'd always been interested in art but never thought I had time for hobbies, never believed I deserved to spend money on something so frivolous. "I don't know how to paint," I told Dorothy when she suggested I sign up. "So? You didn't know how to be a mother when Emily was born, but you figured that out." The first class was terrifying. I sat at a small easel with a blank canvas in front of me, surrounded by people who seemed to know what they were doing, holding a paintbrush like it might bite me. The instructor, a patient woman named Sarah who was probably younger than Emily, showed us how to mix colors and make basic brush strokes. "Don't worry about making mistakes," she said. "That's how we learn. Paint over them and try again." I painted a flower that first day. It was lopsided and the colors were muddy, but it was mine. I'd created something that didn't exist before I sat down at that easel. For the first time in years, I'd spent 2 hours thinking about something other than Emily or money or whether I was becoming a burden to everyone around me. I've been taking those classes for 6 months now. My flowers are still lopsided sometimes, but I've moved on to landscapes and portraits and abstract pieces that come from places in my heart I'd forgotten existed. The smell of acrylics and the feeling of brush against canvas wake up parts of me that had been sleeping for decades. Last week, I painted a self-portrait. Not the sad, desperate woman I'd been 6 months ago, but the person I'm becoming. Someone with opinions and preferences and the right to take up space in the world. Someone who deserves respect and kindness and the simple pleasure of making art on Tuesday afternoons. Emily came to see it when I finished. She stood in front of my easel for a long time, studying the portrait with the same intensity she used to bring to her homework when she was in school. "Is that how you see yourself now?" she asked. "It's how I'm learning to see myself," I said. "You look strong. Independent. I'm working on it." She turned to me then, and I saw tears in her eyes. Not the manipulative tears from before, but something softer, more genuine. "I'm proud of you, Mom. For standing up to me, for fighting back, for not letting me turn you into someone you're not." It was the first time she'd ever said she was proud of me for something that had nothing to do with how well I'd served her needs. I cried too, but they were good tears this time. We've established new traditions, Emily and I. She comes to Queens every other Sunday for lunch, not dinner at expensive restaurants where I feel out of place, but lunch in my sunny yellow kitchen where we can talk without performance or pretense. I cook foods I actually like instead of trying to guess what she wants. She helps with dishes not because I need the help but because it gives us something to do with our hands while we figure out how to be mother and daughter instead of caregiver and burden. Sometimes we don't talk about anything important. She tells me about work projects that actually sound interesting when she explains them properly. I tell her about my painting classes, about Dorothy's latest adventures in online dating, about the books I'm reading now that I have time to read for pleasure again. Sometimes we do talk about important things. About the years we lost to resentment and misunderstanding. About the ways we both contributed to patterns that hurt us. About what we want our relationship to look like going forward. Emily is learning to ask instead of assume. Instead of telling me what's best for my health or my safety or my happiness, she asks what I think, what I want, how I feel about the choices in front of me. It's a small thing, but it changes everything. I'm learning to speak up instead of adapting. When Emily suggests something I don't want to do, I say so directly instead of agreeing to keep the peace and then resenting her for not reading my mind. When I need help, I ask for it specifically instead of dropping hints and hoping she'll guess what I need. We're both learning that love doesn't require sacrifice from either of us. Emily doesn't have to give up her life to take care of me, and I don't have to give up my autonomy to receive care when I need it. It's not perfect. We still have moments of miscommunication, times when old patterns resurface before we catch ourselves. But it's real in a way our relationship hasn't been for years. We're both trying to show up as ourselves instead of playing roles we think the other expects. The biggest surprise has been discovering that I actually like my daughter when she's not trying to manage my life. She's funny and smart and passionate about things that matter to her. She has opinions about politics and movies and books that have nothing to do with me, and listening to her talk about them reminds me that she's a whole person beyond being my child. I think she's discovering something similar about me. That I have thoughts and feelings and experiences that exist independently of my role as her mother. That I was a person before I became her parent and I'm still a person now that she's grown. Last month, she brought Richard to one of our Sunday lunches. I'd been dreading it, expecting him to be cold and formal, the way he'd been during our legal confrontations. But without lawyers and power plays between us, he turned out to be likable enough. He asked genuine questions about my painting, complimented my yellow kitchen, helped with dishes without being asked. During dessert, he said something that surprised me. "I owe you an apology, Margaret." I let Emily convince me that we were doing the right thing, but I should have insisted we talk to you before making any decisions about your life. "We were both scared," Emily added. "But that's not an excuse for treating you like you didn't matter." It wasn't a complete absolution. There are some things that can't be undone with apologies, but it was a beginning. An acknowledgement that what they'd done was wrong, regardless of their intentions. More importantly, it was a promise that it wouldn't happen again. But the person who's changed the most through all this is me. I look back at the woman who woke up that cold morning 6 months ago, who dropped her coffee cup and read that cruel text message and felt like her world was ending, and I barely recognize her. That woman was so small, so afraid, so desperate for any scrap of love or attention that she'd accept cruelty as long as it came with occasional kindness. I'm not that woman anymore. I wake up in the mornings now and the first thing I see is my latest painting, propped on the easel by my bedroom window where the light hits it just right. I make coffee in my mother's old percolator, not because it's what I've always done but because I like the ritual, the smell, the way it connects me to memories that make me smile instead of ache. I dust the family photos on my shelves, but now they're mixed in with new pictures, photos from my painting class, snapshots Dorothy took of me in my art-splattered apron, pictures of my apartment with its cheerful yellow walls and fresh flowers. I'm building a life that belongs to me. The arthritis is still there, but it doesn't define my days anymore. I've learned to ask for help when I need it and to accept it gracefully instead of feeling guilty about being a burden. Dorothy and I look out for each other, but we're friends first, not just two old ladies making do. We go to museums together, try new restaurants, gossip about the neighbors like teenagers. I've made friends at the painting class, Martha, who's 85 and paints landscapes from her childhood in Ireland, and Frank, a retired teacher who's working through a series of abstract pieces inspired by jazz music. We have coffee together after class sometimes, talking about art and books and the world beyond our immediate problems. For the first time in decades, I have a social life that doesn't depend on Emily's availability or approval. I've also started seeing a therapist. James recommended her, a woman named Dr. Rose who specializes in family relationships and emotional abuse. I was resistant at first. Therapy seemed like something for people with real problems, not just old ladies who let their daughters push them around. But Dr. Rose helped me understand that what happened between Emily and me wasn't just a misunderstanding or a phase we went through. It was a pattern of emotional manipulation that had been building for years, enabled by my own reluctance to set boundaries or demand respect. "You taught your daughter that your needs don't matter, Dr." Rose said during one of our sessions. "Not consciously, but through your actions. Every time you sacrificed your own well-being for hers, every time you accepted less than you deserved, you showed her that mothers exist to serve and suffer in silence." It was a hard truth to accept. I'd thought I was being a good mother by putting Emily first, by never complaining or making demands, by being grateful for whatever attention she gave me. But I'd actually been modeling a kind of love that required one person to disappear for the other to thrive. Healthy relationships require two whole people, Dr. Rose explained. Not one person who gives everything and another who takes everything. You can love your daughter without sacrificing yourself to her. Learning to love Emily without losing myself has been the hardest and most important work I've ever done. Emily has started therapy too, which gives me hope that the changes we're making will last. She's beginning to understand how her fear of losing me led her to try to control me, how her definition of care had become indistinguishable from coercion. "I kept thinking that if I could just manage all the variables in your life, I could keep you safe forever," she told me recently. "But all I did was make you miserable and almost lose you completely." We're learning together that love means wanting the best for someone, even when what's best for them isn't what's most convenient for you. It means respecting their right to make their own choices, even when you disagree with those choices. It means showing up as yourself, not as who you think the other person needs you to be. These are lessons I wish I'd learned 35 years ago, when Emily was small and impressionable and I could have shown her a different way to love. But better late than never, I suppose. The real test came last month when I fell in my apartment and sprained my ankle badly enough to need crutches for 2 weeks. The old Emily would have used this as evidence that I couldn't live alone safely, would have revived her campaign to move me to assisted living, would have treated the accident as proof that her fears were justified. But the Emily she's becoming did something different. She called to check on me, offered to bring groceries and help with tasks that required standing, but she didn't try to take over my life or make decisions for me. When I said I wanted to stay in my apartment and manage my recovery at home, she respected that choice even though I could tell it made her nervous. "Are you sure you don't want me to stay with you for a few days?" she asked. "Just until you're steadier on the crutches?" "I'm sure," I said. "But I appreciate you asking instead of just announcing what you thought was best." She laughed at that. "I'm learning." Dorothy helped me during those 2 weeks, making sure I had food and checking on me without hovering. The neighbors pitched in too, offering rides to doctor's appointments and helping with errands. I discovered I had a support network I'd never really acknowledged, people who cared about my well-being without needing to control my choices. My ankle healed perfectly, and I was back to painting class within 3 weeks. Emily was proud of how well I'd managed on my own, and I was proud of her for letting me try. It's these small victories that give me hope. Each time we navigate a challenge without falling back into old patterns, each time we choose respect over fear or manipulation, we build something stronger than what we had before. But this story isn't really about Emily, though she's been central to everything that's happened. This story is about me. About the person I was, the person I became, and the person I'm still becoming. 6 months ago, I was a woman who had forgotten she was allowed to take up space in the world. I lived in the margins of other people's lives, grateful for whatever scraps of attention or affection came my way. I believed that love meant suffering in silence, that being a good mother meant having no needs or desires of my own. Today, I'm a woman who paints landscapes and portraits and abstract pieces that come from the deepest parts of my heart. I have friends who know me as Margaret, not just as Emily's mother. I live in an apartment with yellow walls and fresh flowers, spaces that reflect my taste and personality instead of trying to please or accommodate everyone else. I'm a woman who knows the difference between being loved and being managed, between being cared for and being controlled. I'm a woman who believes she deserves respectful treatment from everyone in her life, including family members who claim to love her. Most importantly, I'm a woman who is no longer afraid of being alone. Not because I don't value relationships, but because I've learned to be good company for myself. I can spend an entire day painting or reading or just sitting in my sunny kitchen drinking coffee and watching the world wake up, and I feel complete. Not lonely, not like I'm waiting for someone else to make my day worthwhile, but genuinely content with my own thoughts and activities. This inner peace is what makes my relationship with Emily possible now. I don't need her to validate my worth or fill my empty hours or prove that I matter. I know I matter, independent of how anyone else treats me. So when Emily calls or visits or includes me in her plans, it's a gift I appreciate rather than a necessity I depend on. The difference is everything. Last Sunday, Emily brought me a framed photo from her apartment, one of the pictures from my shelf that she'd removed when she was angry with me months ago. It was the photo of us at the Museum of Natural History, the one with 7-year-old Emily holding my hand and looking at me like I was the most important person in the world. "I want you to have this back," she said, placing it on my kitchen table. "I shouldn't have taken it in the first place." I looked at the photo, remembering that day, remembering the woman I was then and the little girl Emily had been. So much had changed since then, but something fundamental had remained the same: we loved each other, even when we didn't know how to do it well. "Thank you," I said. "But I want you to keep it." "Why?" "Because that little girl in the picture grew up to be someone I'm proud of. Someone who made mistakes but learned from them, who was brave enough to change when change was hard, who chose love over fear even when it meant admitting she was wrong." Emily cried when I said that, and so did I. But they were good tears this time, tears that washed away the last of the resentment and hurt we'd been carrying around for so long. After she left that day, I stood in my yellow kitchen holding the photo and thinking about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 6 months ago, that text message had felt like the end of the world. Today, I understand it was actually the beginning of my life. Sometimes the greatest betrayal can become the fiercest awakening. Sometimes losing everything you thought you needed shows you who you actually are. Sometimes the people who hurt you the most are also the ones who teach you the most about your own strength. I don't recommend the path I took to get here, the fraud, the manipulation, the months of anguish and legal battles. I wouldn't wish that pain on anyone. But I'm grateful for where it led me. I'm grateful for the woman I've become, for the life I'm building, for the relationships that are based on mutual respect instead of obligation or guilt. Today is Tuesday, which means it's painting day. I'm working on a portrait of Dorothy, trying to capture not just her features but the kindness in her eyes, the strength in the set of her shoulders, the way she looks when she laughs at her own stories. It's challenging work, but that's what makes it rewarding. Tomorrow, Emily is coming for lunch. We're going to make her grandmother's bread recipe together, something we haven't done since she was a teenager. She found the recipe card in her apartment and asked if I'd teach it to her again, and I said yes because I want to share these connections with her, these pieces of our family history that bind us together across generations. But I'm not cooking for Emily because I need her approval or because it's my job as her mother to feed her. I'm cooking with her because I love her and because sharing food with people we care about is one of the ways humans create meaning and connection. The difference matters. Next week, I'm starting a new painting class, watercolors this time, a medium I've never tried. The teacher says it's less forgiving than acrylics, harder to correct mistakes, but also more fluid and spontaneous. It sounds like a metaphor for life, actually. You can't always fix what goes wrong, but you can learn to work with the unexpected, to find beauty in what you didn't plan. I'm 72 years old, and I'm still learning new ways to see and create and be in the world. 6 months ago, I thought my life was over. Now I understand it was just beginning. As I sit here in my apartment, light streaming through windows I can afford to keep, surrounded by paintings I created with my own hands, planning visits with friends who care about me and activities that fill me with joy, I want to share something with you. If any part of this story sounds familiar, if you've ever felt invisible or taken for granted or manipulated by people who claim to love you, listen to me. You are not a burden. You are not too old to start over. You are not obligated to accept disrespectful treatment from anyone, even family members. You deserve to take up space in this world. You deserve to have opinions and preferences and boundaries. You deserve to be treated with kindness and consideration and basic human dignity. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to change your mind. You are allowed to put your own needs first sometimes, to make choices based on what you want rather than what everyone else expects. You are allowed to be happy. It's never too late to remember who you are beneath all the roles you play for other people. It's never too late to reclaim your life, your voice, your right to exist as a whole person rather than just a function in someone else's story. The woman who woke up that cold morning 6 months ago and dropped her coffee cup would tell you it's impossible, that you're too old, too set in your ways, too dependent on people who don't appreciate you. She would tell you to be grateful for whatever scraps of love you can get, to keep your head down and your mouth shut and your expectations low. But I'm here to tell you she was wrong. You have more power than you know. More strength than you've shown. More worth than anyone has ever acknowledged, including yourself. The question isn't whether you deserve better. You do. The question is whether you're ready to fight for it. I hope you are. I hope this story gives you permission to stand up, speak out, and demand the respect you've always deserved. I hope it reminds you that love shouldn't hurt, that care shouldn't feel like control, that family shouldn't be a prison you can never escape. I hope it helps you remember who you are. Have you ever lived something like this? Have you ever felt so small, so invisible, so taken for granted that you forgot you were allowed to matter? Or do you know someone who's living this way right now, someone who needs to hear that they deserve better? Share your story in the comments below. Let's remind each other that we're not alone in this, that our experiences matter, that our voices deserve to be heard. And if this touched your heart, if it reminded you of your own worth or gave you hope for change, please like this video and subscribe. Your support means everything as I continue to share these stories, to open my heart, to remind all of us that it's never too late to choose ourselves. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. Thank you for reminding me that there are people in this world who understand that every story matters, every voice deserves to be heard, every person deserves to be seen. Until next time, remember, you are not invisible. You are not a burden. You are not too late. You are exactly who you were meant to be, and the world needs you in it.